Okay, thanks everybody for coming. This is a presentation on the Crypt, or the Council of York Rite Masonry. Um, One thing we were talking about earlier is that most masonry in the United States is York Rite Masonry, the first 3 degrees of all Blue Lodges, generally based on York Rite Masonry. There's a couple, I think, in Louisiana that are based on Scottish Rite Masonry, but as a general rule, most Masons in the United States are York Rite or what's called American Craft Masonry. We went through the Quarry 4 weeks ago. We went through the Arch 2 weeks ago, and we're going to continue with the Crypt. The Quarry and the Arch presentations are available on YouTube. You can look up the Quarry, the Arch, the Crypt, and the Temple, or we'll be sending out links. All right, so we're going to go ahead and start. Um, Most of Cryptic Masonry takes place before the death of Hiram, but right before his raising. Many of the parts take place within the crypt that's found to be holding an item later discovered by Indiana Jones in one of his most famous movies ever from the 1980s. With the procession of the sun being a focal point to Royal Arch Masonry, and we follow it from spring to summer and the start of autumn. The sun begins its declination. It slowly loses daylight hours until the winter solstice of Capricorn. This is the crypt. This is when the sun is losing time above the horizon until it meets its death with the least amount of daylight hours and then rises again towards the spring equinox of Aries. This starts at the autumn equinox in Libra and continues again until it hits Aries. Think about this. Every drama of this degree has something to do with being underground. I'm primarily concerned with how Hiram meets his very untimely death. Remember that this all happened after the close of the day when the sun went down. Toward the end of the day, the 3 ruffians approached Hiram and demanded that he give them the master's word. He's first stopped by Jubilah or Libra. He's then stopped by Jubilo or Scorpio, and then he's finally killed by Jubilum or Sagittarium, which is how the name is denoted in the original Latin. He's then buried in the rubbish of the temple until they come back at low 12, which is depicted as midnight or the winter solstice in Capricorn. Capricorn has a symbol of an old man with a scythe in his hand. This is Father Time. He's a wayfarer who is symbolized in Masonry as straightening out the ringlets of a young girl's hair. If the Weeping Virgin is considered to be a symbol for Virgo, and Father Time with his scythe a symbol for Capricorn, then the interval of 90 degrees between those two signs will be found to correspond to that occupied by the 3 murderers or the 3 ruffians. The sun is at its lowest point, as noted by the Tropic of Capricorn, the bottom red line here. And it's at the end of its procession around the sun. After this, it moves back towards the spring equinox to begin the procession again. Did you have a question? Oh, I hear somebody in the background. If you could mute your microphone until it's time to speak, that'd be great. And this was actually party time for many of the ancient civilizations. Ancient Rome had dozens of gods for every purpose imaginable, and by 300 BCE, the Roman Empire had combined the festivals for those gods under the name of Dies Natalis Solis Invicti, or Birthday of the Unconquered Sun. So I'm going to open up the forum real quick and see if anybody can tell me anything they see in this picture. Just go ahead and brainstorm. Anybody? Anybody?
Sorry, Nick. I'm so used to trying to get the microphone turned off. Um, I think what we're looking at, we have Mercury because we have wings on his feet. Moving up from the feet, we have a band, and I believe that is Sagittarius that's represented on the band, if I'm not mistaken. We have something of a robe, almost like a shepherd, but then of course he's holding a goat, which is something different. And then we have a sphere, which is I guess you could say 3/4 darkened, which would allude to the autumnal equinox.
Those are some great observations. Anybody else? All right, well, I'll start asking some questions then. John, you hit quite a few of them right on the money. What's in his right arm?
You got the goat.
Is it a goat? It's half a goat,
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah, I see that.
which
Yeah,
signifies Capricorn. And John, what you said in his left hand,
the sphere.
the sphere, denoting that it's 3/4 or mostly dark due to the time of the year. Around his legs, what did you say that was?
You have a band which is almost a zodiacal band
It's a,
representing
yeah, it's exactly a zodiacal band, and it's centered on Capricorn.
that's right.
Yeah, and in the middle of the zodiac band, like we said, the constellation of Capricorn. You made a great observation about his feet, which was
Mercury. You got the winged feet.
all right.
So
Now
you base
this is a Roman festival, so go Roman on that one. Who is
well,
who is Hermes' counterpart in Roman culture?
ah, okay.
I hear the keyboard going.
No, I think you're talking you're talking Mercury.
It is Mercury. There's another person in Roman culture that's depicted the same as Mercury, which is Apollo, who is the
Oh,
sun
yeah.
god.
Okay.
Yeah. Apollo has sacrificed the goat, Capricorn, as returning the sun to its power. The sun is past Capricorn and the days are starting to become longer. This is Dies Natalis Solis Invicti, or Birthday of the Unconquered Sun. Now, here's the fun part about this. This was a week-long festival commencing on December 21st, which is the solstice, and ending on December 27th, with the main feast day taking place on December 25th. It was a feast honoring the renewal of the sun at the winter solstice. It included feasting, dancing, lighting of bonfires, decorating your home with greens, and the giving of gifts. Does this sound familiar?
Yep.
As a matter of fact, the choice of using this day of December 25th has more to do with the Roman festival and the feast of St. John the Evangelist. Here's where we're going to get kind of deep, so hopefully everybody can follow along here. The death of Hiram, or the death of the sun, is followed by 3 more seasons. Now, you remember the nature of the cardinal, fixed, and mutable signs. Cardinal was the first, or entry into. These signs are marked by the solstices and the equinox. Fixed signs were the unmovable parts of the season, Aquarius being the coldest part of the winter season, and mutable signs denote the transition. Pisces denoted the transition of winter to spring, and its symbol is 2 fish, one looking backward, the other one looking forward. Something fishermen can start catching again when the lakes and things are no longer frozen over and the fish start spawning, and there's a whole bunch of fish in the ocean for people to catch. The traditional Jewish festivals were all based around the Hebrew months. In Deuteronomy chapter 16, verse 16 and 17, they say, 3 times in the year shall all thy males appear before the Lord thy God in the place where he shall choose, in the feast of unleavened bread, and in the feast of weeks, and the feast of tabernacles. And they shall not appear before the Lord empty. Every man shall give as he is able, according to the blessing of the Lord thy God, which he hath given thee. Here, which is the month of Nisan, or Abib, is the start of spring, the first month of the Hebrews' calendar, and the cardinal sign of Aries. This is the month of Tammuz, signifies summer, and the cardinal sign of Cancer. Tishrei, Ethanim, is the harvest of, or the end of the summer and beginning of autumn, and the cardinal sign of Libra. I believe there's a Scottish Rite tradition called the Feast of Tishrei, which is when all the big stuff starts. When
That's
all
correct.
the harvest is done and all the food is made. Yeah, so you have a giant feast. And then again, after we come around the horn, is the month of Adar. This is the mutable sign of Pisces, leading into
Hey
Aries
Nick,
for the cycle to begin again. Yeah.
going back to the slide before this one, you mentioned the word Tammuz.
The month of Tammuz, yes. These are the traditional
So
Hebrew names. There might be a different name for it. I don't know what it is offhand.
no, it's proper.
Okay.
Also, Tammuz, the word Tammuz, is an Arabic word and denoting the month of July. So
Oh,
Tammuz in Arabic is July in English.
Ah,
okay. Um, the Hebrew months fall a little bit. The Hebrew months supposed to line up with the constellations. The constellations, like the constellation in the sky, changes in the middle of our current Julian or Gregorian calendar. So Tammuz probably is the start of July, would be my guess. Or excuse me, July. Tammuz would be, yeah, it would be right about the start of July. Another question?
well, not so much another question. I just kind of wanted to point something out here. Um, you mentioned Scottish Rite, and there is indeed a feast of Tishri, and some jurisdictions really go all out on it. Ours kind of seems sort of, and I'm not sure how they do things in Juneau. Jason could probably expand more on that, but a few years ago, I helped rewrite the bylaws for the Anchorage Valley to be in accordance with the Supreme Council, the Supreme Council's requirements, and um, it was interesting going through the Supreme Council's requirements in that they absolutely had things laid out according to the Jewish calendar. So you had, I recall Adar and Tishri and everything, but it didn't really align perfectly with our Gregorian calendar. So it was kind of an interesting exercise in that, you know, it would basically cause certain events to kind of float. So it was it's kind of cool if you had the chance to check out the Supreme Council's constitutions as it as particularly as it applies to the individual valleys, to just read about the calendar requirements for specific events. So you get to see how they align things directly with the Jewish calendar. So anyway, that's just a point of knowledge, I guess.
No, I appreciate that. Terry, you had something you wanted to say?
So is if memory serves me, it's the difference between a solar calendar and a lunar calendar is the variation.
Yes.
Is
It's a
in the
That's
back of
solar.
my head.
correct.
Yeah, the Hebrews used a lunisolar calendar. So it was the month was based on the lunar cycle and also the solar cycle going through, or the precession of the equinoxes. Every couple of years, every like 3 years and then every 4 years, they had to have a second month of Adar. They call it Adar 2. And it relines up the precession of the equinoxes with the moon and the way the sun goes through the constellations. the one of the one of the things that, for lack of a better term, one of the things that really happened badly to the Hebrews in the year zero was when, well, what we would call the year zero is when Julius Caesar redesigned the calendar and said, no, we're going to do it this way. That was really a major poke in the eye. Okay, so we're going to continue back to the Hebrew calendar. Each one of the Hebrew months lines up with one of the constellations of the zodiac. This is how they were able to tell time, determine the season, and be able to prepare for upcoming events. Things like planting, tending, harvesting, they all had specific times throughout the year. They were even aware of the three bad boys right here. And when I say the three bad boys, pun was completely intended. The months of Kislev, Tevet, and Shavat represent the winter months. Kislev is a mutable sign of Sagittarius, transitioning to autumn to winter. Tevet is the cardinal sign of Capricorn, or the solstice, and the beginning of winter. And Shavat is the coldest part, or the fixed sign of the winter, Aquarius. And now we're going to get right back to cryptic masonry and how this all applies. I'm going to take, with all of this in effect, I'm going to talk about triangles. In cryptic masonry, we have specifically a broken triangle. The broken area representing the grave of Hiram, or where the word or where he was buried. Showing Capricorn, or the season of the symbolic death of the sun. Hiram being symbolized by the working tool of a master mason, the trowel, and the horizon being denoted by a sword. Above the sword is the royal arch of the sun, and below it is the crypt. In this depiction of the death is being pointed toward by the tip of the trowel. Crypt is now closed. That's everything we need to know about cryptic masonry symbolism. But now I'll go ahead and open up the panel for any discussion or anything anybody wants to say. Terry, by all means, fire away.
So one of the things you started out with, that setting the place, the location of most of the cryptic degrees, is being underground.
Mm-hmm.
So if we look, that theme of underground is also part of a new movie, but an old book, the Odyssey, because in that Odysseus goes to a cryptic experience, also the underground, the underworld.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting.
What was his conflict in the underworld?
That other world, he was supposed to be performing a ritual so as that he could get guidance. He was looking for anything. That descent where he actually goes and talks to, I believe it was Cersei, not the King of Thrones Cersei, but that physical and spiritual trial that shows how he started developing that part of what we would call the hero's story.
Yeah, the hero's journey. Mm-hmm.
The hero's journey.
Now, are you referring to the labyrinth, or are you referring to the when he goes to the underworld?
Just the idea of it. That's we go back in our Masonic history to the earliest writings being Homer's writings, and how a lot of that seeps out and shows in our mystery plays and stories. How that happens. You have to start that descent to try to know thyself. You've got to go inward. That was just my interpretation.
No, that's another fantastic interpretation of cryptic masonry. It is all internal. It's something that you do have to look back and correct yourself, or take a good look at yourself, which is what in most of the cryptic degrees the craftsmen are going down into the crypt. They're going into themselves to find out what really is inside of each of them to know what to do. And I always get a kick out of one of the degrees. They're being lowered into the crypt in order to find something, and that back then they didn't have like a mechanical hoist. They had a couple of guys holding a rope and another dude tied to it, and that was not an easy or simple thing to do. That was actually quite dangerous. So I think that the concept there of looking back at the things that you've done, or the choices that you've made, can be dangerous, because then you have to actually reflect on what you've done. Anybody else? Any other comments? Questions?
So how does that correlate with the months of the year, or the lower part?
You mean looking back at yourself? How does that correlate with the months of the year?
Correct. Yes.
I guess if you look at it from that aspect, it probably doesn't. I mean, you don't have to reflect on your past events in August. You just kind of, it's kind of a double allegory. The months of the year at a certain point were altered, and this happened from Julius Caesar. He decided to like today, January is the first month of our year because we use the Julian or what's called the Gregorian calendar. I think in was it like 1600 sometime in there, Pope
Right.
Gregory had the calendar fixed to accommodate for the quarter day, and then we got a leap year every so often. Julius used to move the calendar, or Julius Caesar used to move the calendar around to avoid debts and things, which is kind of funny. Um, it's kind of a jerky thing to do because he's the emperor and he could or alter the calendar. People are like, well, I have to pay you at the end of January, and he'd say, well, it's not January yet; it's still December. And people would go, what do you mean it's still December? It's been December for like 45 days, and he'll go, well, we're working on it. It really just. Can you imagine if
That's
if
that's
a,
funny.
a president came out and did that? Oh no, it's still January. What? That wouldn't fly at all. Terry, go ahead.
So one of those things that it goes to is that's one of the first, uh, and I don't want to use the term incorrectly. That's the overshadowing of uh, Hiram Abyss story, because in this he's expressing his belief in resurrection after death. That that's what has to occur, because that was what was, we'll call it, the Jesus's story,
It,
where we talk about in the Preston Webb part, uh, where that we actually ask those in Freemasonry, is I in most means that it's being talked about, is we say both the resurrection and the immortality of the soul. Those are two. Do you believe in the resurrection of the body and the immortality of the soul? Those are part of, in what we call mainstream York Rite Masonry. They're not well understood, that everyone agrees with those stories, what they look like, both the resurrection of the body and the immortality of the soul.
Pierre, fire away.
I'm kind of I cannot paint that picture in my head because I was under the impression that these events happened prior to Jesus' birth. So all these events, all these interpretation, all these depictions happened before, many years before the birth of Jesus. So I don't see it from my point of view.
That's a really good thing to say. So let me actually address this. The cryptic masonry, Royal Arch Masonry and cryptic masonry take place before the birth of Christ. The Royal or Knights Templar is after the birth of Christ. The best way to explain it is when you talk masonry, you're talking Old Testament. When you move to Knights Templar, which is not actually a Masonic degree, it's considered an order. Those are New Testament. So you're right in the ballpark there. Um, the depiction, and this is they talk about Masonry being de-Christianized at a certain point in history. I'm not 100% sure that's the case, but if you look at the parallels, you can very much see it. If you were to basically take Jesus and put him in the position of Hiram Abiff, you probably wouldn't have much of a different story. Jesus was accosted by ruffians, Pilate, Barabbas, and who's the guy? Like Judas. There were three ruffians that accosted Jesus. This is the same story, just told previous. Um, the resurrection, the birth of the unconquered Son, and when you say Son, S-O-N or S-U-N, it's the same dialect. Hercules went through the 12 labors, which all align with the constellations and the stories of the constellations at the time.
The
The Knights
12
of the Round
months.
Table had the same thing. There were 12 Knights of the Round Table. All of these stories are previous tellings or retellings of technically the Jesus story.
Yeah, think foretelling, more
Mhm.
finding the typologies retrospectively, not as from a planning, just kind of showing that the stories just keep repeating themselves, whomever the characters are.
Mhm. Yeah, thank you for that question, Pierre. That was a good one. Brother
Yes,
Meek?
it was.
Am I on? I'm on. Okay.
There you go.
I mean, your remark about was Christianity ever taken out of Masonry? A lot of forms of it, including the Americans, actually no. I mean, if you go to like a Schroeder Rite Lodge, it's Hermetic and Kabbalistic, but it's not Christian. But if you go to the Swedes and the Norwegians, it's openly and Christian only. In fact, there's an American brother deriding it on his podcast recently, but I digress. But with the American Rite, with the York Rite, it retained the Christianity because not only what you already said, but when you're talking about, and I don't think I'm breaking an obligation with this, I really don't. When you talk about the lion's paw, earlier, either in the same degree or maybe one of the earlier degrees in the craft lodge, it talks about the lion of the tribe of Judah. That's a direct reference to Christ. There's no other reference that applies to. So it's still in the DNA. What happened is it opened up to non-Christians, but to pull the Christianity out of it, you would destroy American Masonry, you would destroy British Masonry, French Masonry, uh, s- um, Scandinavian Masonry. You would destroy it. You'd basically have the some of the French and the Germanic forms and the Italian forms left. But even with us, we have the Saints John. We all do. So it's Christianity was never completely stripped out of the craft as craft, but it was opened up to non-Christians.
Yeah, very, very interesting.
Int-
I've heard people talk about the quote unquote de-Christianization of Masonry, and I actually wonder, like I said, I wondered when that happened or at what area, because like you said, I don't think American Rite Masonry that was a problem. I think it was already not there to begin with, especially with Preston Webb, which is what most of the
Okay,
places
Yeah.
use. Uh,
I
Terry,
could
go ahead.
plug.
Oh,
Today,
we'll get back to you, John. One
incidentally,
second.
today is the anniversary of the Antient Grand Lodge. Today, the 25th of July, is actually, and that was one of the contentions between the Antients and the moderns. Was the Antient said it was a de-Christianization. If you go back and just more today in Masonry, you'll find that fact. It was just funny that that happens to be today, and that was one of the complaints, which is similar to another topic going on. The Society of Saint Pius, they want to stay in Roman Catholicism, but that with the ancient ways. Well, that's what the Antioch Grand Lodge did back in the 1850s, as I remember off the top of my head. But that was today. When you say, when did that de-Christianization allegation occur? And I'm going to leave it at an allegation because, people still can discuss whether it was or was not Christian. The Antients thought so.
All right, Brother John May.
So, Nick, really, where it began, Masonry was a Christian, predominantly. I should say predominantly. I mean, was fully a Christian organization up until Anderson's constitutions. So you gotta kind of look at it from this context in that at the time you had Descalier and Anderson working on the constitutions. It was largely Desgallier telling Anderson what he'd like him to write, but they wrote this specifically because Desgallier was a Huguenot. His family fled from France because of religious persecution, and Anderson was a Scottish Presbyterian minister. Both of these gentlemen were kind of oddities being seen around London because the British, the English there still had the stigma that, oh, you're Scottish and you're lesser than us. And then, of course, Desgallier, the common British folk would see him as, oh, you're a French refugee. Kind of the way some people would look down on, say, someone of Hispanic descent coming into the United States. Some people would look down on someone of Hispanic descent coming to the United States, whether illegal or illegal. So there is that. So between Desgallier and Anderson putting together the constitutions, that's when you largely saw the basically the removal of the restriction on what your faith was, just that you would have faith, which opened everything up. So you still have the chapter of the York Rite / American Rite that realistically, you're either going to be of a Judeo-Christian faith to be going through the chapter and the council, and obviously Trinitarian Christian to be going through the Knights Templar. Likewise, you have the Swedish Rite, where if you're not an avowed Christian, specifically Lutheran, you're not going to be received or initiated into the lodges in Sweden, Norway, Iceland, and I believe Denmark. So it's largely, Masonry is largely Christian up until Anderson's constitutions, the first one, 1723, and then with the I guess you could say the global footprint of the British Empire, they brought Masonry with them. So, it landed all over the world, and depending on what the predominant faith was, sure, the lodges would start off with more or less a Christian, I guess you could say a Christian pedigree. In time, the lodges actually, they innovated. Heaven forbid we use that word. They innovated to reflect the predominant belief system of the country that they were in, while still celebrating that we would have the holy writings of other faiths sitting on the altars. So largely, that's where it came from, Nick.
Interesting. Thank you. That's something I definitely I've always wanted to know. John Bishop, you had something you wanted to add?
Well, yeah. First of all, John mentioned it, and so did a couple of other brothers. You have to always remember that there's British arrogance in their relationship to others, whether it's French, Scottish, Irish, or Americans. They have their little arrogant thing, especially back in those days. But I believe the accepting of other faiths other than the Christian faith evolved out of York Rite Masonry in America. Back in the mid 1800s, somewhere I've heard that in the at the time of us becoming a country, it was pretty much Christian. But because of our religious liberties in this country, lodges started and I think it was an evolutionary thing. But I don't, and I've heard discussions on this in some of the places I've been, but I've never heard anybody say anything where there was ever a particular act that made it. But obviously, Grand Lodges have had to approve various lodges and had it somewhere in their bylaws, but I think it kind of evolved in the mid 1800s that we could accept any faith, and of course, I've heard the question, well, if a guy says his faith is atheist, does that constitute that yeah. And I'm not going down that rabbit hole, and I don't think anybody else wants to either.
Actually, I will jump down that rabbit hole. One of the things that's in our Preston Webb ritual is it denotes an irreligious libertine or a stupid atheist. So I'm wondering if it's making a distinction there. Has anybody ever heard that? What's the difference between an atheist and a stupid atheist?
I've heard it. I
I've
forget
never
what it
heard that.
was, but I do know a brother up in Germany. Not the brother that spoke here. This is a completely different brother. I do know an open atheistic brother who's a member of one of the I forget which sub-Grand Lodge, but he's a member of one of the Schroeder Lodges in Germany. And he's openly atheist. So there must be a distinction made somewhere.
Yeah, I've wondered that too. I've met Jewish people that are kind of atheists that don't exactly believe in what you would consider a god. We could really have a deep dive on what the concept of God is to most people. Is it some guy with gray hair and a beard sitting in front of a desk on top of a cloud, the quote unquote Spinozian concept of it, or is it a higher self? Is it just an active force? I mean, there's all sorts of ways that you can go down that rabbit hole.
Yeah, I mean, Illinois has the thing where you don't have to believe in immortality, the soul. You don't have to believe. It's basically you have to believe in a higher power, period. And that wording has caused more problems than you can ever know, because then you're talking. This is where the discussions and there's discussions. My attitude is, this is a stupid discussion, but there's actually discussions of whether a Satanist can join or a Luciferian can join, or an OTO AA guy can join. And I know other grand officers, I know because I've gone toe to toe with them, that will say a Luciferian is a perfectly acceptable Masonic religion.
The concept of joining is different than the concept of the obligation. If you take an obligation,
of course.
Yeah, if you take an obligation on yourself to abide by what's coming out of Masonry, you chose to make that yours. If you lie, saying that I'm not really going to do what's in my obligation, I'm just taking it to join, then you really gain nothing from it. Okay, you joined a fraternity, but you're totally missing the entire point. So yeah,
of course.
If it is a religious deal, why you're joining and lying about the concept to begin with, then it just really doesn't help you at all.
No, of course not. But from the point of view of this argument going up into the Grand Lodge,
yeah,
and that opens up all kinds of problems. I mean, I understand. Okay, we all signed on for the rule of what God being not even God, but being a higher power. That was it. Higher power being whatever. Okay. This is a rule we signed on for. This is a rule we signed on for. But there's also the whole thing I call the principle of you know what I mean. Well, Lucifer's a god for them. Yeah, but you know what I mean. No, I don't. Yeah, you do. And it's like, come on. Or OTO's a religion. Yes, or not OTO, but the double A inside OTO is a religion, so therefore he believes in God. Well, yeah, but I mean, to what ends? There's also the thing that you could believe in a God. You have antinomian you have antinomian theological Satanists out there. You have all this stuff, and they're particularly big up in Northern Europe for whatever reason. But so they believe in a God. They believe in the angel that rebelled, fell, burning in hell better than serving in heaven. They believe in that as God. That'll fit the Illinois definition too, perfectly well. But at what point do we put our foot down and say, look, you know what I mean? Come on. This absolute concept of antinomian rebellion is deconstructive to the notion of religion. It's a contradiction in terms.
Yeah, good point. All right. Any other questions regarding the crypt? Statements, comments, criticisms?
A very good discussion.
All right. Yeah, that's one of the best things about Academia Lux Borealis is our discussions. Pierre, just a heads up for you. We have an ALB meeting on the fourth Wednesday of each month, unless otherwise told. If you're interested in coming and having a discussion with ALB, you're certainly welcome. So is everybody else here if you want to come to the ALB discussions. Last Wednesday, we had a discussion on morality, and it went for quite a while. The morals of Masonry, the morals of how people function. It was fantastic. Other than that, I'll go
I
ahead
would
and
love to if I can have whatever you have time, if you can send me a reminder, that'd be great.
So the link that you followed today is the same chat room that we're in right now, and that particular follow that particular link on the fourth Wednesday at around about 7 o'clock, and you'll pop in just like this. This is the same chat room. Okay, I will go ahead and stop the recording, and before we're done here, in 2 weeks. The 8th of August, I'm going to be finishing this giant presentation with the Orders of the Temple, or the Christian or orders of the York Rite degrees, the Order of Malta, the Order of I hate it when my brain blanks out. The Order of Malta, the Order of the Knights Hospitalier, and the Order of the Temple. And hopefully we'll see everybody there in 2 weeks. And this is where we're going to get really deep. Which is interesting that the discussions that we had today are definitely leading right into what we're going to be talking about in a couple of weeks. John May.
Officers meeting immediately after this.
Okay, following this, we're going to have an officers meeting. All right, recording is done, and we hope to see everybody on the 8th of August.